All right, there are some books we read that immediately capture us, and they stick with us for a long time after we've read the last page. One of those most impactful books that has influenced my work is called The Big Leap: Conquer Your Hidden Fear and Take Life to the Next Level. It has sold over 350,000 copies since its original publication 14 years ago. And today I'm excited to say that Gay Hendricks, who authored that book, is back with us to talk about his newest work. He served for more than 40 years as one of the major contributors to the field of relationship transformation and body-mind therapies, and he is a New York Times best-selling author, and his books include Conscious Loving and The Big Leap. And he's also a returning guest to your Passion, Purpose, and Personal Brand podcast. Gay, you were kind enough to be one of my first guests over 2 years ago, back in episode 7. So welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. It's great to be with you.
All right. Well, we're going to get into some really juicy stuff today, but I almost think of you as a friend, as much of my work is helping people reinvent themselves. And it's been influenced by a lot of the ideas in your book, The Big Leap. So sometimes I'll hear you like a voice inside of my head. I've listened to the audiobook several times, but that book outlined the idea of going beyond the reader's happiness ceiling, right? We have this happiness ceiling, and into experiencing the joys of life in ever-growing ways. So now, after 14 years, you have this companion book right here to help us know how to do it. And
Yes.
What I appreciate about this is you're going to give us a roadmap, a recipe, so to speak. So in the foreword of this book, you mentioned you had a different goal for writing this book than any other books that you've written. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, for a couple of reasons. Because one is I wrote the book sort of by popular demand. I've never had that happen before, but The Big Leap came out, I think, in 2009 or 2010, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, I've gotten jillions of emails about The Big Leap, and a lot of them have said, hey, could you turn this into a day-at-a-time book so we have something to focus on every day? And I let that gestate for about 15 years, and then Joel Fotinos, who's a publisher that is the head of St. Martin's Press, big publisher in New York and a great guy, he got hold of me one day and suggested the same idea. And so I really took it to heart, and it was, I can't say it was an easy book to write, because writing 366 anything, even if it's 366 tips on household cleaning, that's a long journey. And so, but I really got into it, and I really, I got a wink from the universe, because I broke my leg. And I basically had to sit around for 6 months, and because I couldn't go play golf or go hiking or ride my bike or any of the things I usually do. So that was helpful too, to have my undivided attention, because I couldn't go out and do keynote speeches or anything, or consultations. So anyway, it was a lot of fun to write, a lot of work, and a lot of long nights, but it was worth it, because what I wanted to do was give people something practical they could do every day, even if they had 10 seconds or 1 minute or 2 minutes. Each page of the new book, and by the way, it's a day 1, day 2, day 3. You don't have to start it on January 1st. You start it on whenever you decide to start it. And so what I did was take the concepts in The Big Leap and give you some kind of bite-sized thing you could do every day. And so we've been getting wonderful feedback on the book, and I'm really happy now that it's out in the world and all the sweat of writing it is over. I can sit back and kind of enjoy talking about it.
Yes, and I do appreciate sometimes the universe tells us to take a seat and do some other things. So I'm glad you listened. I'm sorry you had a physical injury, but I'm glad that you listened, and so many people will benefit from it. So you do have this day at a time. I want you to really help us understand, this is a book that is it a book that I can open up to like I look at day 57 and look at this, or are they meant to build upon each other?
Oh, great question. They are meant to build on each other. That's why I highly recommend that you first read the foreword and the front matter of just a few pages, but then just dive right in and start on day one and make a commitment to it. And because it actually builds on each other, and it goes in 3 big cycles. And so you go through, X number of days, and then you go to that second cycle, which deepens the stuff you've done in the first cycle and so forth into the end of the book.
All right. Very good. So yes, there is a method to it. So make sure you're going to take full advantage of it, that you follow it chronologically within the days that are named here. So Gay, one thing I just absolutely loved was the very first question on day 1. Would you be willing to make this day the first of 365 days of positive leaps in your life? Now, you could have started with anything on day 1, but you intentionally chose that. Why is that question so important?
Well, because right away, I want to engage the person who's reading the book or listening to the book. I want to engage them and let them know it's a me and you project we're dealing with here. It's something that you have to take on yourself. It's a commitment that you need to make, because even though I can write the book and show you how to do it, there's a difference between that and then standing up and running onto the field and participating in the game yourself. So it's designed to get everybody off the bench and onto the field with one quick question. I had to ask myself that same question when I first started, and I managed to keep asking myself that question every day and every day and every day. And that's another thing about the new book, is that sometimes all it asks you to do is say a commitment inside yourself and see if it feels good, see if it feels heartfelt. So it literally only takes you 10 seconds to do that. So it's a very time efficient book too, because I know people are often in a hurry these days and they want something they can do in 10 seconds or 2 minutes and kind of get your day off on the right foot.
Yes, and having it within that time frame, it also sets us up for success, that we can dedicate that short amount of time doing it. But they're really, really powerful questions. Now, the other thing you do in this book is you give us permission to be human, to acknowledge that some days we may get off track, right? Some days we may drift a little bit. So I love the fact that you encourage that within the book. And how do you tell us to restart?
Well, one thing I like to do, Lisa, is put it in the context of something almost everybody's familiar with. If you've ever been on an airplane, the airplane gets you to the destination with an automatic pilot system that's really exquisite. Like about 100 times a minute, it does this little calculation. Oh, we're drifting a little to the right, correct to the left. Oh, we're drifting a little to the left, correct to the right. Oh, we're drifting a little up, correct down. And so it's always drifting off center and making corrections. And so if you really think about that, like I'm near LA, so if I get on the plane going to Maui, which I hope to do later on in the year, then the automatic pilot gets me to Maui by being wrong most of the time. It's wrong 99% of the time because it has this amazing capacity to recommit to the right direction. And that's a useful thing to know, because in human life, most of the time people beat up on themselves or criticize themselves when they drift off. Oh, no, I've drifted off. It's like, a person told me they went on a diet and then decided about 3:00 in the afternoon to have one stick of gum, which had some sugar in it, which they were supposed to be avoiding. So they ate the one stick of gum, and then by about 8 o'clock at night, they were eating an entire pie because they went, okay, well, I've drifted off. I might as well just dive in and sabotage myself. And so, but you really get to your goal by an act of recommitting over and over and over again, because it's the human tendency to drift. So what we need to do is need an elegant little automatic pilot system. And so commitment is the automatic pilot, and recommitment is what gets you there. So like in the first bit of first page of the new book, I ask people to make a commitment to bringing forth more and more of their genius every day of their life, to make their whole life be about that in addition to all the other things it's about. But just, bring in a little bit of commitment to your genius to your day, and then watch that begin to unfold. And pretty soon, we always start with 10 minutes. Here, we ask people to start with a 10-minute focus on their genius, basically sitting in a little room by themselves and asking themselves a simple question for 10 minutes and breathing. Like, here's the way it goes. What do I most love to do? And then 3 easy breaths, and then come back to that question. What do I most love to do? Because that's the key of being in your genius. To me, the big point of all of this work, whether it's, with the new book or with the original Big Leap, it's to get into your life the possibility of doing more and more of what you most love to do and what you're most uniquely suited to do. To me, that's genius. And that's what I wanted. That's how I've been living for the past 40 years since I began to think about the material that's in the Big Leap. People ask me how long it took me to write the Big Leap, and I said, well, it took me 6 months to a year, but I'd been thinking about it nonstop for 30 years. So by the time I sat down to write it, it didn't take long at all. But I want people to go about their lives looking for what could be facilitative of more and more of their genius, because I want to live in a world of 7 billion geniuses. We need it.
We certainly do. We certainly do. And Gay, I want to note that when you just described how to do this, you started with the sound, right? Which you're noted for. And that leads into my next question, which is day 5, the power of wonder. Yes. Wonder is the superpower in manifesting your goals and dreams. And you often reference this power of wonder and awe. But we tell ourselves that we're too busy, we've got too much to do. How do we frame wonder and fit it into our days?
I love to talk about this particular subject, so you've lit me up. Wonder is a superpower because if you genuinely wonder about something, it takes you out of the zone of the known. And one of our biggest problems in solving problems is we try to solve problems using the same technology that hasn't worked before. We do more and more of what already isn't working. And it's like, I remember one time crossing the border between Nepal and India way back 45 years ago when I was a backpacking hippie. And there was this fellow there from Germany, I think he was, and the clerk at the immigration clerk couldn't understand what the fellow was saying, and so the fellow was shouting louder and louder of what already wasn't being understood, and so it was a great example. Finally, he got it through. I kind of translated for him a little bit, but there's a tendency when something isn't working to really, instead of just, let me wonder about that. Let me open up to a state of actual creative innocence where I'm not pretending to know something I don't know. And so wonder is this powerful technology because, well, let me just give a fancy metaphysical way of saying it. It puts you into direct contact with the creative forces of the universe. When you wonder, you're doing something the universe is very good at, which is creating something out of nothing. One of my favorite examples is there's a place out in the universe, according to a science magazine I was reading in a dentist's office, there's a place out in the universe that's spewing out 32 new suns, S-U-N-S, like our sun, 32 new suns a second.
Wow.
Wow. I mean, that's a hot spot right there. And so this is how the raw stuff of the universe works, though. And we are made of exactly the same material as everything else in the universe. And so one of the biggest mistakes human beings make is to kind of separate ourselves out from the rest of nature and the rest of the universe and not feel we're part of it, but feel like we're trying to solve something about it. But we need to start from a place of unity where we realize that I am the universe, you are the universe, and that what we need to do is surrender ourselves to opening up to it directly. Having that direct creative relationship with the universe is available through this technology of wonder, because when you wonder, even about something simple, I wonder what I'd like to have for lunch today. Wow, that puts you into direct creative contact with the universe. And that is a beautiful place to be, to solve any problem from within the whole.
Yes, and I think too, the realization that we are all interconnected, that we are all this energy that is sourced together, I think is such a powerful thing. And that sound is really critical, is it not, Gay, to make that sound?
Ooh, yes. And let me give you a very simple physiological reason. When you hum, you actually connect the left and the right hemisphere of your brain. To hum, you've got to connect the right and the left, the musical and the word part, the sound part. So it's a direct connection with yourself as well as a direct connection with the universe. But also, let me put in a plug for it simply because it feels good. To wonder about something. It's a rare thing in life because most of the time we go around either knowing or pretending to know or hopelessly confused and not knowing how to get out of that. So here's a technology of going out of that state of confusion into a state of openness and connection with the universe.
Yes, that's really just amazing that we have that tool. Well, speaking of wonder, I want to go to our next one because I had a wonder situation a few weeks ago, and it ties in with day 15, the excellence trap. There's a downside to this zone. And let me tell you what happened is I found myself very busy with a really major project. And then I got really grumpy and I was just felt very agitated and I couldn't figure out why. And what I wondered is, why am I feeling this way? Why did my body feel this way? Why was I grumpy? I was doing work I was really good at doing. So I've set you up there, Gay, for your magic. Tell me what was going on there.
I appreciate that. Well, in the books, in both the new book and The Big Leap, I discuss 4 zones that human beings spend their days in. One, I hope you don't spend very much time in it, but a lot of people do, is the zone of incompetence, where you're doing things you're not very good at and you don't like to do. But a lot of people feel trapped into doing things like that. A second zone is the zone of competence, where you're doing something that you're okay at, but somebody else could do it just as well. The two zones where we really need to focus our attention is because a lot of folks like you and me and others like us have gotten ourselves into the excellence zone where we're doing things we're good at and where we get good feedback about that make us money, that get us glory, that bring us all the good things in life. However, there's a trap built into that because in order to do what happens is the more you do that, the more people want you to do it. And so the more times you say, yes, I'll be on this committee, the more people say, oh, there's a person who likes to serve on committee. Let me call on him, And I was a university professor for 21 years. And boy, did I learn that one the hard way. I remember my first faculty meeting, my hand shot up and volunteered for this obscure committee. And I remember one of my new friends saying, oh, you're going to regret that so much, And I was soon to find out why, because pretty soon everybody kept nominating me for more and more committees. And I saw a lot of people actually burn out that way because they use up all their creative energy rushing from class to committee meeting to committee meeting to class. And they never had time to sit down and develop what they really wanted to do their own work on. Now, here's a big thing for you, madam, if I may directly address you, Absolutely. As well as all the other members of your viewing audience. People in their excellence zone have a yearning inside to be in their genius zone. It comes wired in. It's there. And if you get overly busy in your excellence zone, that yearning will become annoying, and then it will become annoying the more you put it off. So in life, we're getting, especially, you may not be there yet, but once you've reached that magic age of your late 30s and early 40s, it begins to really amplify that yearning for genius because, like one of our great developmental psychologists, Erik Erikson, says each decade has a developmental crisis or challenge. And in the 50s, when you get into your 50s, the challenge is creativity or stagnation, one or the other. You're either doing things that feed stagnation in you, or you're doing things that feed your creativity, your genius, your generativity. And so that becomes more and more important the older you get. Another thing we say in developmental psychology is your job in your 20s is to experiment. Just try on different things, experiments, one after the other. In your 30s, you find your life. In your 40s, you build your life. And in your 50s, you enjoy your life. And, by your 50s, you've got some of the wrinkles out of your belly. Usually you're not as hungry anymore. You're not as driven anymore. And you have a chance to kind of sit back and say, a little bit more. Now, hopefully we enjoy our lives in our 30s and 40s too. I know I enjoyed the heck out of, building my life in my 30s, going on Oprah and writing books and things like that. It was a very exciting 10 years or so of my life. I probably wouldn't be here in this particular place without it. And it wasn't everything. There was a time when that was a lot of fun, but after a million or so frequent flyer miles, man, another trip to Chicago in the middle of winter didn't quite seem as juicy as it did when I was 35 years old. So anyway, I was so glad when things like Squadcaster and video conferences and Zoom and all that came along, because now I can give keynote speeches sitting right here in this chair in my office, and have done many times. Have taught all-day workshops sitting right here and plan to do more of that. So thankfully, they've made it so now that we don't have to haul our actual 185-pound, 6-foot bodies around through airports.
Yes, and boy, is that great. So as you talk about zone of excellence, we're going to jump to day 99, primal longing. This is what you were talking about, Gay. So
Yes.
you say the phrase primal longing is another way of saying what you most deeply want. And it's doing what's most meaningful to you and making your biggest contribution to the world. And you encourage us to stay in touch with our primal longing. I believe we're seeing more and more people that are in the process of reinventing themselves. I think particularly after we had a pause for when we were in the pandemic and people had a chance to kind of look up and say, what am I doing? How does primal longing play into the decision to reinvent ourselves?
Primal longing is something that, I can say the words, but what you really need to do is tune into your body. It's one of those heart-centered, chest-centered feelings that is down in there, I think, in almost everyone if you become sensitive to it. I didn't really become sensitive to my inner world until one magic day in when I was 24 years old, actually, when I suddenly had an experience that sort of turned on the lights inside myself. And I realized I had a whole storage house of emotions inside me that I'd never really acknowledged or certainly ever shared to anybody else. I found sadness, I found anger, I found fear. Then when I looked deeper, I found things like longing and yearning and compassion and things that were sort of buried under all those emotions that I hadn't ever contacted that were on the surface. So I think, for example, you can't really talk yourself into feeling compassionate towards someone that you have a conflict with. What you can do, though, is create natural compassion by acknowledging whatever your feelings are about that person. Anger, perhaps, or sadness, or fear, or lack of connection, or feeling of betrayal, or whatever the actual emotions are that are in everybody's stack. I say a human being is like a parfait of feeling. We have some on the surface that are, like excitement, anger, delight, interest, sadness, fear, going further and further in a way down in your body, because most people, when they feel fear, point at their bellies. They point at butterfly sensations or tight belly. Yeah. Most people, when they're sad, point at something in their chest. And anger, they, tend to tighten the upper part of their body or clench their fists or tighten their shoulders. But all of these things are in this inner world that I know my educational system did not do a very good job of teaching me about. I don't think anybody in the whole time I was in high school or college ever talked about how to solve a problem without making the other person wrong, or how to deal with simple daily feelings of anger, sadness, fear, how to deal with something if you feel depressed about something. What do you do about that? That kind of stuff would have been, I think, possible to teach in the first grade. But why did I have to wait till I was in graduate school or getting a PhD at Stanford to delve into that world, because it's something that's so human that I think, like I said, I have actually been in schools where they had emotional literacy training and they had first graders in there talking about things they were scared about and things they were excited about and natural compassion and things like that. So it can be done. We just need to open our educational scope a little bit wider.
Yeah, I agree it can be done. I have a grandchild that his preschool teacher will tell us he is so in touch with his feelings. He will say, I feel sad. And the fact that these children can recognize this, but yet I think what we do is we groom that out of people and we tell people it makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to see you cry. So I think we condition that out, don't we, Gay?
Oh, yeah. And, here's something that made my sparse remaining hair stand on end. And it was that when children go into school, kinesiologists have cataloged that they have about 3,000 different movements that they can do. But when they graduate, when they're seniors, they're down to 300 or so movements. What? In other words, we lose 90% of our kinesthetic intelligence in the educational process. No fair. And so then later on, we have to go to movement therapy and Pilates and yoga and things like that to reconvene our attention back in our bodies again, where they belong. And because human beings, are very head-centric in the sense that our thoughts often kind of predominate, but we need to remember that we are mind-body entities and that, we are whole beings, and to leave our bodies behind is to sacrifice a good bit of what we've evolved to be here on our planet.
Yeah, it's the whole package. It's the whole package. So we're going to jump on over to day 21. And we're going to get into the upper limit problem, which I think is one of the things that you're most well known for, along with some other things. And day 21 is taming the ego. And so, listeners, I'm trying to give you a sampling of the book, just the depth of just even one of these pages as we go through. But it starts with resistance to feeling good for long periods of time can also come from fear.
Yes.
What is that about, Gay?
Yes. Well, most of us aren't accustomed to allowing ourselves to savor good feeling in our bodies. In fact, you could say that human beings are much more programmed to focus on adversity and negative things. I mean, just think, because human beings spent a few million years walking around barefooted, we have hundreds of little points in our feet that register pain. But you don't have as much here in the back of your hand because you haven't been walking around on the back of your hands for a couple of million years. And so you've learned, and I've learned, to have a nervous system that is always about overcoming adversity. And that's a good thing. We've gotten here by overcoming a lot of adversity. We no longer have to retreat to the back of the cave and wave fire sticks at the tiger that was trying to get in there to eat us. We don't deal with that anymore. Now we just have to deal with telemarketing calls that are there, and, which is maybe as equally irritating, but not as harmful as a saber-toothed tiger. So we're accustomed to dealing with adversity. What we're not accustomed to dealing with is allowing things to go well and allowing ourselves to feel good for long periods of time. It's why the king doesn't, I was going to use the example of, it's why the king doesn't walk down the street with a gigantic smile on his face saying, "Man, have I got it made. Cheer up, everybody. You've got it made too. I'm rich. I get to dress in cool looking clothes and live in a fancy house. Let's whoop it up, everybody," because the feedback he's going to get is very negative. That's the reason every time you see the king, King Charles, it's a grave look, and the queen is maybe perplexed looking, but she's grave. And so we've pretended to keep a lid on our good feeling so we don't go around upsetting each other. But let's reacquaint ourselves with feeling good and let it be okay to feel fabulous all the time. Why not? When I first started, though, I had to start with little increments of, like when I first started was back in the 80s, when I was in my 30s, when I first started focusing on my upper limit problem. And I learned very quickly that I had lots of different ways that I kept myself trapped. And one way was with my worry thoughts, that when I'd start to feel good, I'd start worrying. There must be something going wrong that I'm not paying attention to. Or sometimes I would start an argument. I had about a 3-day capacity for things going well at the time. And then I would start an argument in my relationship. So gradually I began to clean up those upper limit problems so that what took over was basically feeling good all the time. And so I've been blessed now for the past 25 years to be able to do only things that I most love to do that bring me the greatest satisfaction. And I've created a life where I get to live with the people that I love and love the people I live with. And we're all engaged in the same acts of genius every day. And it makes for a really good way to live, to begin to cultivate more and more and more good feeling, organic good feeling.
Yes, and you've done that by practicing these types of things, this recognizing the upper limit and moving through it. I know as an entrepreneur, I will speak with others who are maybe using other people or situations as excuses on why they can't do more. When from the outside, I'll look at it and I'll think, well, why don't you just clear that out of the way, of doing that? So how do you coach people to see that barrier they've put in front of them is self-inflicted?
Well, it's a tough one to do. At some point, people wake up to that organically, but my job and your job is to help them maybe wake up before they organically wake up. Like I always quote my famous client from Colorado many years ago, where I was a professor there for 21 years at the University of Colorado, and I also had a private practice on Thursdays where I would see clients. And so one day I had a gentleman come in who was in his 30s. I think he was about mid-30s, 35 or so, for his first session. And he told me that since he'd been 17 years old, he had more than a dozen relationships with women where they left him suddenly. It could be after a month, it could be after a year, but suddenly the relationship would disappear. And he said, my all-time favorite quote from all my years as a psychotherapist, he said, "I'm beginning to wonder if this has something to do with me." That it took him all of those episodes to wake up to, could this be something to do with me rather than these betraying women? It's like his life had become an endless country song, where people were always leaving him. But here's the thing. It took him about 10 minutes of genuine wonder to realize, oh, my mother left our family abruptly when I was 2 years old, and I spent my childhood listening to my dad's betrayal stories. Mm-hmm. Why hadn't he seen that already on his own? That's where wonder comes in, because you get so locked into your story of the limit you have to operate out of, that it takes sometimes a jolt from the universe or some kind of big bottom-out event to wake us up. I had to do it. When I first had my big wake-up event at age 24, I was 100 pounds or more overweight. In other words, I weigh 185 pounds now. I'm 6 feet tall. Then I weighed 300 pounds, and I was still 6 feet tall. So I was very fat. I was in a terribly toxic relationship. I was in a very toxic workplace setting. I smoked heavily, a couple of packs of Marlboros a day. Fortunately, I didn't drink. Never had a taste for alcohol. Otherwise, I would have probably done what other members of my family do and become alcoholics. But I was basically killing myself at age 44. And I had a big wake-up moment, what I now call an out of Hendricks experience, where I landed on my back on a snowy road one day, almost knocked myself out, but I knocked myself kind of out of my normal way of seeing myself. And that's when the lights came on down in myself, and I saw all this old stash of anger, fear, and sadness. But I also saw what I now call pure consciousness, which is this place of absolute openness and creativity from which we can reinvent ourselves. And the tool for getting into that is feeling and wonder, and our natural ability to surrender to ourselves, to our deepest nature, and let that come through.
Yes. And so I hear wonder again, just the power of that. which also leads to, one thing you talk about in the book, The Big Leap Year, it touches on the power of intuition in decision making. And I want to bring up now, maybe to shift it a little bit more towards the business and marketplace. It used to be that if you worked hard, that you could get ahead in business. It used to be, then it moved to if you have a prestigious degree from a university, that you could get ahead in business. Then we moved into emotional intelligence. But we're hearing more and more these days, Gay, about the power of intuition. And many of those around the boardroom table are thinking, well, that doesn't fit into a logical decision-making framework. How do we bring intuition into the business world? Because we're hearing more and more about it. You're hearing, how did you know that? What was the sense? Any advice in that area?
Yes. As a matter of fact, back in 1996, I think, Bantam Doubleday Dell published a book of mine called The Corporate Mystic. And in The Corporate Mystic, I enumerate three things that the top business people that I'd ever worked with have going for them: visioning, intuition, and integrity. And the intuition part, well, here's the way I put it. Back during the 1980s, I did a lot of, and sometimes in the 70s, I did a lot of corporate consultations where I would go work somewhere on site with the CEO or the top three executive committee or something, or the board sometimes if there was a boardroom squabble. So often my job was to kind of parachute into difficult situations and help people get out of them, sometimes individuals, sometimes small teams. So I had opportunity to work with a lot of incredibly bright business people. Like I went down to Austin, Texas many times to consult with Dell Computer in the 90s after they were founded. And I went to Motorola many times out in Chicago and other places, IBM, Bell Labs, all over the place to consult with their detectives. And here is a big finding. Drum roll. I found more intuition and practical spirituality in business leaders than I ever found in ashrams or religious settings that I'd been in. That some of these folks were operating with a level of intuition, but they never really thought of it that way. It was just an astonishing ability to do certain things. Like I always used to marvel at Michael Dell or another Michael Milken. They say, I say this about both those guys, that a mind like that comes along every 400 or 500 years, that can actually just map the future. Like Michael Dell, had this idea. He's a college sophomore. Boy, when you go to buy a computer at a store, you have to deal with a lot of $7 an hour, people that don't know anything. Whereas here in my dorm, I'm surrounded by computer geniuses. What if I had the calls, 800 number calls started being taken by these guys and you build your own computer? Ding. Wow. Wow. And so he goes to his parents and says, I'd like to drop out of college, and could you loan me $1,000 to set up this new business? And thank goodness they said yes, because that later on turned to many, many millions of dollars for them in terms of Dell stock. So that's a dramatic example, but I found intuition all over the place in gifted business people. Now I think they just need to kind of start acknowledging that and giving themselves credit for it. And if you're going to ask how to facilitate intuition, let me jump to the answer, which is everybody's got it. You just have to clear the other stuff out of the way. Human beings got here by being intuitive and sensitive like crazy, because roll the clock back thousands of years where we had to be sensitive to things that we're not sensitive to anymore. Like, for example, the Bushmen of South Africa who still live often in nomadic situations where they follow the migration of game animals. That's what that's how they get a lot of their sustenance. These folks can feel the vibration of migrating buffalo miles away, 9 miles away. It's been documented that they can feel the vibration in their calves of migrating buffalo. Whoa. I haven't felt anything in my calves today as far as migrating anything, and I live in a place where there's peacocks and emus and probably some cows stashed around. But anyway, what I'm saying is we've lost a lot of our sensitivity to the world. And human beings are so incredibly telepathic, but we don't even think of that as a skill. But who hasn't had the thing of thinking of a song and then you turn on the radio 10 minutes later and there's that song, or what happened to me recently is that Peter and his wife, Peter and Wendy Howard, whom I had the opportunity to introduce to each other, 25 years ago, eventually got married and are having this wonderful relationship. And the other day, I found myself thinking of them and just thinking, oh, gee, I wonder how Peter and Wendy are doing, because I hadn't heard from them in many, many, many years. The next day, I got an email from Peter saying, and it was a wonderful email where he was saying, we're just having such a wonderful time, and we wanted to thank you guys for putting us together and, blessing our relationship as well as giving us tools to be with. And that was so heartwarming for me to see, but it was also a testimony to how intuition works and telepathy works. And so I think we ought to just space for our telepathy and our intuition and quit trying to talk ourselves up and realize that we got here through millions of years of being more and more intuitive.
Yes, that's a really great point. I had one of those intuitive moments yesterday. I left my iPad on the plane about a month ago, and I thought, should I replace it or not? And something told me, let's just wait another couple days. Don't you know I had an email in my inbox at 10 a.m. saying we found it. So it's just, we have that. We just don't realize, we don't give ourselves enough credit for it. Gay, thank you so much for sharing your genius with us today and through all of your works. I just really appreciate you giving us the insights. I want to thank you for writing this book. I'll hold it up again, folks, Your Big Leap Year. I'm so excited to be using this with my clients in their work, and I would encourage you to get it too. But I do want to read something in here, Gay, that you end out the foreword. Every day you work on your genius, making your own dreams come true. You are also making my dreams come true. And that really, most authors are not writing a book that gives back so much to them. So I just want to thank you for making us feel like we're all in this together.
Well, thank you. That touches me very deeply. Actually, I appreciate you putting your finger on that. I have not had that specific point referenced in any of the interviews I've done. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, after 75 interviews, I found a question or a comment that was not made. So another wonderful gay conversation with Gay Hendricks. I'd like to remind everyone the power of leaning into your passion. It will point you to your purpose, and you'll discover that personal brand of integrity. Save this episode, pick up a copy of The Big Leap Year. We've been waiting 14 years for this, folks, so now we finally got it. Your future self is waiting for you, and this book is your guidebook to help you find it. Thanks so much, Gay.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I appreciate it.